Hello and welcome to the Made for More podcast. This is an incredibly exciting moment for me. This is something that I've dreamed of for years, and I just want to thank you for listening. I mean, listening to this right now, you'll be one of three people. You'll be friends and family who are first in the door, within the first couple of weeks, first tens of listeners. You might be coming back in a few months, or a few weeks, or even a year's time, just to start from the beginning and then move forward from there. Or most excitingly, you could be coming back in 5, 8, 10 years time to just understand where it all started. So regardless of who you are, thank you so much. I really appreciate, whatever this journey has been, whether you're just at the start, whether it's in 10 years time. And I think it'd be remiss of me not to start off by thanking my wife, my friends, my family, for helping me get to this point where I can actually start. Now, I think what you'll be interested to know is actually what this podcast is about, who I am, adding a little bit of context to understand whether this is something that, you want to listen to, something that you feel like will really benefit you. So in terms of the aim of this podcast, the Made for More High Performance Mindset podcast, that's what this is my manifestation of my belief in human potential. And what I mean by that is I believe that, it's kind of in the title, but I believe that anyone from any background with any certain set of circumstances who believes in what they're doing, or believes in themselves at least, has the ability to be able to achieve incredible things and shatter that glass ceiling, or, traverse so far beyond the limits of what they thought was possible. That's my personal, philosophy and what I believe. And that's what I've spent, the last couple of years of my life building in order to be able to give this to you. Now, this podcast, it's something that it's a passion of mine. This isn't, designed as a commercial machine or anything like that. This is my way of really helping and having impact at scale, which is a massive value of mine. I want to be able to help touch your life in the same way that mine has been touched by, huge inspirations like Chris Will and his Modern Wisdom podcast. Massive, massive inspiration of mine. And if he ever listens to this, I need to thank him, because over the thousands of hours that I've listened to podcasts, hundreds and hundreds of his specifically, it's slowly grown within me the understanding that I can do this. And, inspiration has finally met emulation, and the rubber's meeting the road, as it were. But not just him, obviously Rogan, the absolute GOAT, is classic. Mike Thurston's podcast, I really, really enjoy as well. Stephen Bartlett's earlier podcasts, I think him as an individual, his Behind the Diary series on YouTube, all these people. And, I spied in the questions I've been asked to talk a little bit about the guests that I want to have on. So I'll mention them all a little bit later. But what this podcast is about is exploring what it's taken effectively to get to the top of industries, to be successful, and being able to strategically break that down so that you can at least take inspiration or try to replicate, and therefore speed up the learning curve of being able to achieve these things in your life. That's exactly what's happened for me. And I just want to be able to continue to proliferate that kind of information out in the world, as it's helped me so much. So I want to help you so much. And I am a firm believer of we are never, at that point where we're finished growing, ever, in our entire lives. Every single day is a school day. And even if it means being 0.001% better than you were the previous day, for me, that's everything. Now, with that being said, the format of this, I'm going to do regular one-on-one episodes where I can monologue and I can talk about the things that I've been studying. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a second. But predominantly, this is going to be a guest format podcast where I'm going to bring on some really, really incredible, exciting people who have touched my life. Likely they will have touched yours as well in some format. I'm so fortunate, and I was saying this to Ailish, my wife, the other day. Our immediate friends and family and circle has so much to offer the world, and they already do. I just can't wait to put them on this platform so that it's more accessible, so that I can put my spin on understanding them, really understanding like how they came to be, what they had to overcome, and what that can look like for you. So that's the format. I will do probably initially more breakdowns of, a recap of the last 10 episodes, things that I've learned in the last 10 episodes, and, maybe a Q&A based on some milestones. I'll take inspiration from Chris on that one. And I think beyond that, I'd really like to implement some other things that I've seen from other podcasts that I find really exciting and inspiring, such as in the Diary of a CEO, he always has a guest leave a question. I love that idea. So I'm definitely taking inspiration from that. And listen, like, this will be a living, breathing, growing piece of me. I will continue to quote Chris forever, but this body of work will be a thinly veiled autobiography in that I'm still developing. I'm still learning every day. I have a hunger to become the best version of myself. And if you're listening to this, I'm sure you do as well. So who am I? This is one of the most difficult questions to sum up. And especially if you know me well, or if you're coming back after you've gotten to know me well to watch this or listen. I've somehow managed to ram so many lives into a relatively short time frame. I feel like I've genuinely lived so many different life experiences. And I was writing this all out. I found writing to be an incredible outlet for me in organizing my thoughts. And one thing that stands clear for me is any time that I commit myself to a new role in life or a new occupation or belief, I fully obsess and immerse myself in that. And my obsession becomes learning and gaining so much proficiency so as quickly as possible, getting to that 80% of the proficiency curve as quickly as humanly possible. Not, for any other reason than that is my obsession at the time. So I really immerse myself in that identity. And I feel like I'm able to gain a lot of the skills and the knowledge and the information quite quickly when it comes to these things. And that's something I really value about myself. So that's why I've been able to lead these multiple. And what I mean by that is I'm 26 at the time of this recording. And within those I will miss things, by the way, but within those 26 years, I have been a long-standing martial artist for nearly half of my life. I have competed in rugby, judo, like a whole number of sports, like a huge number of sports at a fairly good level, but predominantly rugby and judo. I had a very impactful nascent military career where I went through an army officer pipeline. It really brought the best out in me, and I lived and breathed that. That was honestly, about a third of my being, my purpose, who I was. And very quickly, these kind of series of what I consider to be wonderfully hard things happened in my life. And it sounds weird to say that because, from an external perspective, they were horribly disruptive, hard things to go through, having your personality, or at least a third of who you think you are, transplanted from you and burnt on the fire. But every single time I encounter something that's difficult, every single time that I encounter something that's really tough to work through, my internal better self says, This is just another hill that we've climbed. Our tolerance for bullshit, as I say to clients, is that much higher. So I had a nascent military career, which absorbed my entire life. And that was 5 years long, from the age of, 16 to, 5 years. And straight from that, also during that time, I've also multitasked and done a lot of different things at once. So during that time, I was also competing in judo. During that time, I also had other jobs, working at a bar or delivery riding and, all sorts of these things. Each has had somewhat of a different impact on me. But from there, I was medically discharged after university. The army put me through university. Those of you that are watching that went to a place called Welbeck with me or have a knowledge of that will understand what I'm talking about. And I likely will talk about it more in the future because it was incredibly formative for me. But this military chapter in my life came to an abrupt end around COVID at the end of university as well. And that chapter of my life really just slammed shut. No grace, no decorum. It slammed shut. And it kind of pushed Ailish and I into the situation where we had to then start moving. Otherwise, we knew we were just going to stagnate and nothing was going to happen. So that's when I got a job in real estate in Dubai. We'd never been to Dubai. I'd been on a plane a handful of times, and we quite frankly didn't have enough money. And we moved here. We took a leap on faith in ourselves that we were going to be able to make it work. And we did, ultimately. We've been here over 5 years now at the time of recording. And immediately from a very different type of life in Newcastle, where, as I've just recovered all the kinds of things that I was doing. I go into a corporate real estate environment, high, really, really kind of high and heavy, emotionally, physically, doing minimum 12 to 14 hours 14-hour days, 6.5, 7 days a week. And I'm not exaggerating there. Anyone that knew me during that time, anyone that worked with me knew I was like you talk about putting your nose to the grindstone. I was, wearing down to the back of my teeth because from my background and my history as a working class background, a very modest background, for me, what success was hard work. And that is, to a degree, I still believe that. But, it's massively developed since then. But, I was 21, 22. Anyway, so I did that for just over 2.5 years, kind of between 2.5 and 3 years. And it got to this point, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, I think, in that Ailish had created a business when we moved here. She was previously an influencer, and I will have her on the show at some point, which I think will be fun. Once I really have a feeling for what this piece of myself looks like and feels like, and she can talk about her story then. But she'd been an influencer. She started. She was obviously has her master's in nutritional science and learned to become a fitness coach and started her own business. And that business is what would become the Wellness Club. And about 3 years ago, it came to this breaking point where I'd kind of lost myself a little bit. I'd become the shell of who I was, because obviously I'd lost this huge chunk of purpose within myself from having to leave medically discharged from the army. And then attaching all of this identity to the ability to work hard, the ability to earn money, to succeed in real estate. And I had, realistically, I started regularly hitting some pretty significant figures month to month, generally, but especially for my age, because I kind of hit that catch point where you understand what's going on. You have the confidence, you're in the flow. But as a result, I was never home. I was rarely present. My health had taken a massive backseat. And for someone who, during that time in the army was, a reservist PTI, so I was the fitness person in the squadron. And obviously competing at a high level, fitness was a huge part of myself. That just withered and died at that time. Now, it's not to say that I regret the career choice at all whatsoever. It was massively foundational, and it began my obsessive desire to really understand the fundamentals of business, and it introduced me to business and sales and, you know, interacting with different types of people in the real world, in a different culture, etc. But it was having a massive impact on our relationship, on my day-to-day happiness. And you have all these outward signs of success, you know, the crazy apartment with the nice view, you know, nice car, nice things. But ultimately, if that's not true, if that's not truly for you, it's hollow, you know? So that's what I felt. And it coincided with me having a massive shoulder reconstruction, which I realized now, just saying that, that's the reason why I got medically discharged. I had 10 dislocations, shoulder dislocations over the course of I want to say 7 or 8 years that I had the injury, and it came from rugby. I was terrified to get medically discharged, ironically, and I hid that injury, and that's my own fault. I thought if I can make it to Sandhurst, and it dislocates there, I'll get back trooped and I'll be in the army so they can sort me out. And unfortunately, that short-sightedness caught up with me just as I was approaching that hurdle. So I tripped and face planted irreparably, and that, you know, changed the course of my life forever. However, I believe everything happens for a reason. This is something I've spoken about with someone who's going to be one of the first guests, a really good friend of mine, Kieran, who, you know, arguably has had one of the more prolific careers that I, you know, personally know. And I'm really excited to chat about this chapter of my life with him. Anyway, so, and by the way, I've got a set of structured notes to follow during this podcast, because I am King Waffler. I'm very liable to go off on a tangent, and if you know me well, you're laughing now. But I will get better at this. I will commit myself to improving this and becoming better each time. So yes, from real estate, I left to effectively help Ailish grow and scale what became the Wellness Club. We've done that now for years together. And that was probably, in hindsight, the most pivotal moment of my adult life thus far, being thrust into entrepreneurship. I had a good understanding of how corporate structures worked. I'd worked in one, and I'm very inquisitive, and, you know, I sponge things in around me. For whatever reason, I love sponging in information. That's the best way to describe it. I mean, you can see my bookshelf. I obsessively read. But that was such a huge corner for me to round, because I'd never had no deadlines, no structures, no timeline. We were literally creating. It's crazy to think about in hindsight, because we've got everything so organized now. But we were creating a role out of thin air, and the business wasn't really a business at the time. It was a monetized hobby, and I would describe it as dragged it kicking and screaming, and with the guidance of some incredible mentors who I will constantly thank and reference over time. Foremost of those is Mark Coles, who will be a guest on the podcast as well. But we dragged it into a place where it had structure, it had meaning, it had purpose, and we could then drive it as a vehicle towards our futures. And Alex Hormozy, most recently for me, is the source of this quote, in that entrepreneurship is the greatest vehicle for self-improvement, because there's nowhere to hide. In entrepreneurship, you are the business, and the business reflects you. If you haven't got your shit together, the business will struggle, and you will constantly hit the same bottlenecks, because it's you. As the operator, as the driver, it's error from you. So business has become, and the psychology of business, the structure of business became such a big focal point in my life, and I dedicated myself to that. I spent years obsessively learning about sales and understanding how I could improve myself and gain this knowledge and understand these case studies. I've probably, not even probably, I've 100% consumed at least, 500 hours worth of really granular tactical business, advice just from YouTube. And it sounds a bit of a cop out because people go, oh, it's YouTube. YouTube is the font of all human greatness, in my opinion. There's so much on YouTube and it's free. I absolutely love the platform, and it's something that I will be doing more of myself anyway. So you're probably starting to get an impression now of how I've managed to live these different lives. And even now, earlier this year, I started, we got the Wellness Club to a point where I didn't need to be so involved. And I've started Made for More. I obviously conceptualized it. I started it. I'm a high performance coach. I'm a high performance researcher. And what that means is, on the research side of things, my areas of focus, interest, expertise are in obviously business, philosophy, psychology, to some obviously, left over from the last 8 years of my life, health, fitness, athletic performance. And for me, high performance is rolling that all together. And I have my own theories. I regularly read academic papers and write and produce essays. I'm working on many, many different things, including some ideas for books. But anyway, I won't talk about that because I'm the kind of person that likes to talk about things when they're genuinely in motion and, genuinely coming to fruition. I know that that will happen, so I'm happy to tell you, but I'll tell you more about that later in time. So that obsessive nature of wanting to understand and really live and breathe high performance and succeed, I think success is a huge part of this. And the experience that we've had and the fulfillment you get from coaching, as well as consulting, led me to start working in coaching and consulting for performance, which honestly thinly walks the line between mindset, strategy, and a handful of other things. And it's really fun to pull that all together. I love being able to look and problem solve. I suppose that comes from my background. The degree I did was in civil engineering. I think at the core of myself, I'm an engineer, a problem solver. And it's just fun, and I love doing it. I think something else worth mentioning is, I'll probably touch on my childhood a bit more in the future, but although modest, I felt like it's important to distinguish that I had everything I could have needed. My parents, my mum and dad, between them, gave me everything I believe that is the raw ingredients to be able to forge yourself into something that you would never have been conceivable as a child. I had love and support. That's all I needed. They gave me opportunities and I took them, like, however they managed to wrangle that. From my parents, I really benefited from different things. My dad, specifically work ethic and having a personal creed or a code of honor. And from mum, just the sheer mental resilience of her is, and the persistence and the mindset of, you have to go and do this. You can do this. It's all a case of controlling the mind. So I just wanted to give them a little shout out. They'll definitely be watching this as well. But I think, just to give you a little bit more of a understanding of the podcast, I think I've talked about myself enough for today. You likely got the gist. Now, in terms of how the podcast is going to work, for the time being, I'm planning to release one episode a week. And predominantly these will be guest episodes, a mix of in-person, over the phone. I live in Dubai currently, and a lot of the really interesting people that I want to speak to also live here, but equally people live all over the shop. And something that's really important for me, and it kind of leads into the next point, this podcast will be entirely organic. Um, in business, it's called bootstrapping. I've invested, a little bit into this, and I want to see this grow and flourish off of its own merit. So as the podcast grows, as you save it, share it, engage with it, and more people come and join and benefit from it, obviously that will come with partnerships and, greater production value. And with the podcast, it will all be recycled back into itself. So eventually, you're going to start to see, again, taking inspiration from modern wisdom to emulate Chris's incredible art, his work of himself. I would love to do cinematic episodes. I would love to travel and, meet people just to speak to them. I think a huge milestone in the podcast will be going to Austin. And I think, if you're into podcasts, you know why that will be. But yeah, this is all going to be made of its own merit. And I'm really excited for you to be able to see this journey, to obviously to experience this journey. But continually throughout, my guiding light will be, how can I provide you the most value? How can I make it more accessible, more entertaining, better quality? I'll upgrade equipment eventually. But for the time being, that's the plan. And in terms of ads, because I actually got this question a lot, what am I going to do about ads? My promise to you as the listener or the watcher, I will only ever, and you can quote me on this, I will only ever talk about, introduce, recommend products that I personally think are the absolute tits and something that I believe in myself, likely a company that I own, or, for example, with the Wellness Club, I can say without any shadow of a doubt, that is, as a women's health brand, it is fucking incredible. What we've created, the atmosphere, the ecosystem, the community, I can wholeheartedly, hand on heart, say, if you're ready for change, it is the best service in the world. And that's what I mean. Typically, I'm going to be working with friends brands who I know them, I believe in them, I believe in their product, their mission, my own. And there's a few brands that I'll always dream to work with in terms of a partnership. I might answer that a little bit later on. But the first one that comes to mind, I think Through Dark would be very cool. Very cool. I'm somewhat of an adventurous spirit, and obviously they've got the special forces background, which I respect, beyond pretty much a lot else in terms of their capability, and I just love their products. So that they come to mind. I've got a whole list. But they were just the ones at the front of the mind. So brands like that, who I can genuinely say, like, I love them. But anyway, I think on to the next kind of chapter of this first episode, which is going to be the audience questions. There were so many of these. I lost track because basically I transcripted them from Instagram stories to this page. So I didn't do the user handle as well. I will do that in the future, I promise. And some of I couldn't include some of them. This is like a semi-serious podcast, so I didn't want to put too many non PG ones in. But nevertheless, on to the first question. So, question one: what was the catalyst to finally getting everything moving? A wonderful question. This is something I've wanted to do genuinely. Having a podcast is something I've always actually wanted to do, if that makes sense. I didn't know what that meant. I've always wanted to be online sharing my thoughts, my feelings, helping add value to the world, especially from someone who received so much free value earlier on. When I realized I wanted to create a podcast, probably about 2.5 years ago, it coincided with my injury. My shoulder reconstruction and subsequent recovery, which was honestly crazy. Like it was so severe. And I just had a lot of time to reflect. It was somewhat drug-induced reflection, but a huge opening of another chapter in my life became possible. I understood that the door of entrepreneurship and creation opened up to me when I left real estate at this time, this change period. During that period, I also decided, I was bedridden. I wanted to do an Ironman. I wanted to do all these hard things. And partially to prove that I could, and that I was still worthy despite the fact not being able to do the thing that I'd wanted to do forever, the army. And the arduous courses, eventually selection, things. These were all my aspirations and my dreams. And I would say that they don't haunt me anymore, but they certainly echo within me. I think that's a good way of putting it. But they certainly haunted me for many years. Slightly off topic. But coming back to the question, about 3 years ago now, was when the little spark of, I want to do something like this. This seems to be my purpose. And that came from having listened and watched podcasts for the best part of 5, 6 years, 7 years before that, literally since they got going. I actually vividly remember watching Chris Will, I think his episode 2 with Stu Morton from the gym. And we used to go to the same gym in Newcastle called CrossFit Tyneside. Regrettably, I didn't really know him at the time. But Stu, the guy, the ex-Royal Marine who was planning to row across the Atlantic. By the way, you can still go and watch that episode. It's really, really fun to see how far Chris has come. But I vividly remember watching that, and understanding that this is like what the world of podcasting was, or at least listening. I can't remember whether I watched or listened. I know what it looks like though. Obviously, Rogan's been doing this forever. And some of the more impactful episodes I ever watched were off the back of Joe Rogan, like the Naval Ravikant original episode, obviously the early Peterson episodes. And yeah, anyway, I digress. That little spark of, I can do this. And again, when inspiration meets emulation, that's what you're witnessing at the moment. In terms of the name Made for More, that was something I actually worked on for not an embarrassing long amount of time. It could have been positive procrastination, but for me, it was really, really important to get the name right. And I agonized over it for the best part of literally, I'm not even fucking joking, 6 months, to get to this point where that felt right. It felt like I had this, it wasn't quite a eureka moment, but it was a warm, comforting feeling that dropped into my center of being that is correct. Because I believe that we are all made for more. So hopefully that answers your question. In terms of recording this episode, I wanted to start recording before the baby was born. But one thing led to another, health issues, etc. They're just all excuses. Effectively, I'm only starting now, but I'm glad to have this out in 2025 because I wanted to start releasing in early 2025. And maybe you've not been keeping up and you might be watching this right now at the end of 2025 thinking, I thought he said he was going to start at the beginning. Things have moved on. Anyway, question 2. What is your Mount Rushmore or Infinity Gauntlet of guests? A reoccurring theme is going to be referencing Modern Wisdom by Chris Will, which again, if by some miracle you don't know what that is or you haven't listened, please go listen. It's incredible. My favorite body of independent media. So he references like what his 5 magical pedestal guests or 4 or 5 ish would be. And so, yeah, that's kind of become like a thing, I guess, at least in the podcasting realm. So to answer the question, my Mount Rushmore slash Infinity Gauntlet, I think obviously Chris Williamson. That it literally hits me in the chest. The thought of having, either having him as a guest or getting to spend more time with him. That is number one for me. Alex Hormozy, I respect deeply, and I've gotten so much from him. Simon Squibb, similarly. I think we have a very similar mission, actually. Something I care deeply about is community and young people in the UK, and I think he's fantastic. I've gotten a huge amount of value from him, and I love what he does. Honestly, there's so many. In terms of less serious, like podcasting slash self-improvement people, I would absolutely love, you know, to speak with Henry Cavill. I think he is super cool. He's very much a he worships the work that he does. He's like super nerdy. I love that. Sabrina Carpenter, I would absolutely love to have on the podcast. And I think there's a number of you who know how much Ailish and I love her music. I hope this age as well. I've actually got the list here. Going slightly off piste. They're the ones that came to mind straight away. Ross Edgley, of course. I'm a massive fan of Ross Edgley, and very much look forward to meeting him. James Hype, the DJ, is, again, like probably my favorite artist overall. And I think that his come up story is so interesting. He shares it constantly. And I absolutely like Vittori's music as well. Other interesting people, Rory Sutherland, the marketer. I just think that guy's electric. Obviously, this list would be incomplete without speaking to Joe Rogan. I think that will be such an incredible milestone. And plus, for having listened to him, well, at the time, definitely over a decade. I'm a UFC fan. I'm a comedy fan. It would just be incredible. I'd love to speak to Luke Nichols from the Outdoor Boys YouTube. I think he would be fascinating. And I'll do one more. I've got so many. What you can't see is I've got a list of about 300 names here. All people I revere. I think probably a bit closer to home. I am very excited to speak to Fergus Crawley. And obviously, like I said, I'm going to have my old mentor, Mark. I'd love to have my old CEO, Lewis, also on the podcast as well. So yeah, I think that's enough of me naming people. If you're any of these people watching, I would love to speak to you. I will move mountains to come and speak to you, or make an effort. And I promise we'd have a really fun conversation and bring a lot of value to a lot of people. If you know them or think they should, or have any recommendations, if you're seeing this on socials, tag them, message them, send them this. So question, I think we're on 3. What else are you working on at the moment? Valid question, because I'm constantly working on lots of different things, but I like to give my full attention to one thing at a time and then inculcate that. A huge amount of my effort is going into my coaching and consultancy. I love having that impact on that personal level. I think leadership is such an incredible vehicle for self-improvement as well. It makes me better. Like, you hear about the obligation to teach. I think I learned from Stephen Bartlett. Obviously, I'd love to speak to Stephen Bartlett as well. But I learned this definitely from him, in that you need to create the obligation to teach, whether that be doing a seminar or a lecture, or taking your clients through something that you understand, that you've implemented well yourself. But the level of understanding required to be able to, impart that successfully to someone else is on a different level. So to list, I am personally, I am developing on becoming someone who is magnetic, who is a modern polymath. Professionally, I'm still managing and kind of chief of operations within the Wellness Club. I have obviously founded and coaching with Made for More. I'm also doing consultancy, but just on a note, like, and I can talk about my business more another time. I have decided to only ever work with 10 clients within my coaching. And that's because the level of myself that I give to each of those clients, the level of complexity, the level of everything, I want to be able to protect other, time and headspace. And for me, 10 feels like that perfect number. That might change in the future. And in terms of consultancy, I do one-off, I do packages, corporate, performance improvement packages is something I'm really, really excited for. So yes, and in the future, obviously, this is going to be a regular part of my life. I think a very, very, very exciting part of my life, which I am hopelessly excited for. And I do have at least 3, probably 4 books in me. I'm going to be writing, well, I'd already do write essays and, email newsletters and things like that. And obviously producing more long form content such as this. I want to put more of myself out there. This is my passion. I really, truly want to have impact at scale. And to do that, I need to put more of myself out there. I need to become better every day so that I can, kind of reveal the steps of how it got me there, the missteps, the mistakes. That's what else I'm working on at the moment. And, overarching, I want to be the best person possible for my wife, my child, my family, and provide for them. That's the top and bottom of it. Question, I'm going to stop numbering them because I'll lose count. The next question, what are 3 songs we wouldn't think you'd like? This is a funny one because I've got such an eclectic taste in music, and I mean, Sabrina Carpenter being one of my favorite artists, I think is probably unexpected to some people. Okay, these are going to come off the top of my head. Love You Like a Love Song by Selena Gomez. Absolute slap. One of the few songs I actually know off by heart. I'm terrible at remembering lyrics. SOS by Rihanna. Used to wake up to that as my alarm at Warwick. My roommates hated it because I had it on a speaker. I used to get up at like 10 to 5. Budget by Megan Thee Stallion. I think she's actually one of the very few like female rappers with solid bars. Really, really good. Genuinely one of my favorite songs ever is got to be House Tour by Sabrina Carpenter. That's a newer one. Work of art. That's 4. I think I'll leave it there. There's many, many more that would be, and Tragedy by Steps. Love a bit of that. I think that's my wife's influence. But I hope you enjoyed them. So next question, what are your intentions with the podcast? I think I've covered that quite well, but I think to get to a point in 5 years' time where I have my own studio, I'm speaking to obviously some of the most influential people to ever exist, but also bringing the people that I know from now onto that stage and giving people a platform who have so much to share, but perhaps just haven't, had the exposure that they deserve. I think within my intention for the podcast is, I wrote this in my vision plan earlier this year. I want to help 1 million souls. I want to help. I don't know how to quantify that, if I'm honest. I think perhaps when we get to, 5 million, reoccurring regular listeners, I would say that I will have had at least a significant impact on 1/5 of those, perhaps. But yeah, that's my intention with the podcast. I want to create something incredible. And again, I will hands up say that I'm inspired by modern wisdom by obviously the Joe Rogan Experience, Die with CEO, First Things First, and actually The Modern Mind by Fergus Crawley as well was fantastic. These are all inspirations for me, and it's just my version of that, because I was thinking about this earlier actually before recording this, in that oftentimes, and I've had this conversation actually with someone I really dearly love, because they didn't understand, the same information needs to be translated and repurposed and reconstituted as time goes on. I mean, for fuck's sake, like, I'm a huge, huge philosophy nerd. The things that were said 2,000 years ago are still, if not, sorry, as relevant, but more relevant now than they ever have been. And I'm not creating something new when I'm quoting the Stoics, but it's repurposing that in a way that's digestible for you, that might resonate more with you because it resonates more with me. I read far and wide, and I listen and I absorb far and wide to understand where these little granules of something, really exciting pieces of, soul igniting information that just make you think differently. If I can give you the opportunity of perspective, and that's probably what this boils down to, the opportunity for understanding a perspective that you might not have known, I'm only ever going to be putting the best out there in the world. I mean, even say to a ridiculous extreme, say I just solely reposted and rehashed. That's the only thing I did. No fresh ideas, no personal take. The ideas that I love from creators that I, value, I would be providing value to someone, because people know me that don't know about these creators. So I'm going to absolutely do my best to curate this medium so that it brings as much value as physically possible. And I genuinely, I get slightly emotional at the idea of someone coming to me in 5 or 7 years' time and telling me about the impact I've had on them, in the same way that, I'll use the best example for this podcast, which is Chris has had on me. So that's the intention. This is a really cool question, actually. What would you do if you couldn't work, and instead of receiving a salary for working, you received a salary to not work? And this is a layered question because it requires some caveats. I think if you weren't allowed to work, what would you basically do for free? And for me, I'm already doing it. I would help people. I would mentor them. I would coach them. I would consult with them. I would do this. Like, I would genuinely pay, thousands of dollars a month to be able to do this. I'm just fortunate that, it's kind of almost free, and eventually it's going to be able to fund itself. So in terms of my purpose in the world, I'm highly aligned on that. That's what I would do. I would have these incredible conversations. I would monologue in the hope of touching something within you. And day to day, I'd definitely travel more. Definitely travel with Ailish and our child and my family, and just take them and explore. Every year, 2 of my friends and I go and do some kind of adventure. This year we went to Kyrgyzstan, and we just drove around and horse trekked and did all kinds of crazy shit. So I definitely do more stuff like that. See the world. I think there's so much world out there to see, and I can get into that, like the whole, universal energies and stuff like that. But that's what I would do. I think that's a really interesting question to ask some of the high performers as well. So I definitely will do that. The next question: do you feel more or less stress running your own business compared to your last career? Fantastic question. I think it's different. It's a different type of stress. And what I mean by that is, when you're a business owner, especially when you have employees and many employees, and you're solely relying on your own kind of hands to create everything that you need in life, there's a sort of existential, I wouldn't say dread, but threat, in that if you don't do it, no one else is coming. It's a slightly unfair comparison because obviously working in real estate, it's, in Dubai at least, it's 100% commission. So you don't get paid if you don't sell houses or flats or whatever. And that's a huge learning curve. And I honestly think that's what gave me such a leg up into entrepreneurship. So I would personally say that this is a stress I am happy to bear. It's a growth stress for me. And it's one that aligns with my long-term vision, my long-term purpose. The responsibility that I feel now, although it can manifest in stress, at the end of the month, how am I going to pay the team? The payment provider's been shut down for a month and a half, stuff like that. I would choose that over the abrasive lack of responsibility, but massive abundance of unpleasantness that came with the real estate stuff. In terms of, I'm not knocking real estate as an industry. I still love real estate. And I think had it not been for the Wellness Club needing me to come on board and us designing our life, obviously part of it was we wanted to design our life so that we could have a baby and both be there, both be present. But I could have continued to do that easily. And it's linear. The longer you spend in it, the more money you make. And I was doing that every single year. It was pretty much doubling what I'd done the previous year. But I think for me, it started to eat away at myself, at the things that I valued, at who I was. So in terms of, we categorize stress as impact on the body and the mind, it's less with your own business because everything is in your hands. There's a greater deal of responsibility, but I personally prefer having more agency. I've literally got it written up on the wall. In this room, I can and will create the life of our dreams. And that'd be a good soundbite, But I fully believe in that. I'll say that again. In this room, I can and will create the life of our dreams. Everything can be made by our own hands. It's one of the reasons I'm so obsessed with neuropsychology and, self-development. Next question. How does it feel having a naughty mustache? One of these crept through the gaps. Fantastic. I've gone back and forth with the idea of shaving it to see what my face looks like again. I think my wife and baby wouldn't forgive me if I did that. I thought about doing it for Movember, but I just didn't have the heart. Didn't have the heart to do it. I think I'm starting to get known as the mooey guy or the mustache man. I don't mind that. What are your current physique goals? I mean, I'd love to say Mike Thurston-esque. I think he's probably got the best physique, full stop. But realistically, at the beginning of this year, not the beginning. At the beginning of this year, I had some health issues, which then obviously the pregnancy took precedence, and I was training in the background, probably lifting too heavy. Definitely lifting too heavy. And then we had the baby. And what I started to do as soon as we had the baby, I thought, right, running a business, newborn baby, starting another business. I like to do hard things because they're hard. And it's the frame of, the bigger the mountain, the greater the story, the better the view type thing. So I entered into what I considered at the time like a photo shoot prep with Joe Gibson, who's a good friend of mine, and like a pretty significant fat loss phase. I was 113 kilos. My musculature was probably more than it has been ever or in a very long time, but there was a significant amount of fat. And as of recording this, I'm about 11 kilos lighter. Obviously look a lot leaner. Physique wise, I would have loved to have gotten into like crazy shape. But I found out after an injury 2.5 months ago, I found out a few weeks ago that I've got severe lower back and back spinal issues, multiple bulged, compressed, and one severely herniated disc. So that's going to change the way that I exercise forever. In the meantime, I want to stay lean. I want to look athletic and be capable. Honestly, that's the only thing I care about now, is not necessarily the pain. I live with the pain every day, but it's being able to just do things, like run a marathon, or I've got some challenges coming up that I'm pretty excited about. But yeah, just being capable, being fit, strong, flexible, healthy. Next question. What made you take the leap into starting your own business? I think I've covered this. But to recap briefly, it came to a point with the Wellness Club where it was Ailish's, then it was ours. And you're never going to have the same level of sheer soul igniting joy and fire under your feet for something that isn't your vision. And whilst I truly, truly believe in what we do, and I will sit here for hours and hours every day, singing our praises for what we do and how we do it, the impact we have from the top of the roofs. Ultimately, I don't want to be a women's health coach for the rest of my life, or managing that. I want to have my own impact, and I think something about becoming a parent and the rubber meeting the road in terms of when the person that you can be starts looking back over the shoulder at where you are now and realizing that if you don't do something, you're never going to catch up to that person. So yeah, that's why now. And I think with vision and purpose, and I want to talk to Mark about this because he's really, in my opinion, one of the best to do it in terms of vision and values and purpose within business. You need to realign, and I will fully realign myself, my place in the universe, my place in the world, my place in my family, myself, at least every 6 months. And I do this with my clients when we start off, because all we need to do is plant that flag in the ground in the future. And with absolute certainty, if you want to go there, your reality will start to unfold towards it. I truly believe this. I truly, truly believe this. I know this to be how the world works. If you believe that that is achievable and you start acting like the person that can achieve those things, it will happen. It's just a time frame. So yeah, I went through one of those shifts, and this is the consequence of those actions. The Jake who is doing live shows, or a cinematic episode in New York or Austin or Paris, I'm becoming him. I am already him, but he's just a few steps ahead and has the fun to do that solely from this podcast. 1, 5, 10, and 25-year plan for life/business. That's the next question. That's a very broad one. I'm going to keep this very, very short because I don't want this to be too intense. 1-year plan: be in the best shape of my life, be a very considerate, present father and partner, and literally be the best person I can to my family and my friends. Be non-combative, be friendly, and by combative I mean in a verbal sense. It's something that I've really massively worked on this year myself, specifically in the last couple of months. Business-wise, I want to have scaled my coaching business to 7 figures. This podcast to, I'm not too fixed on subscriber numbers or something, but I want to have been consistent with this and improved week by week. If I can hit 250,000 regular listeners in a year's time, I'll be tickled pink. Within 5 years' time, have complete and utter financial security, own multiple properties, probably have a second child by then, and continue down this road of self-development. The 10 and 25 start to get a little bit abstract. We're talking about houses in multiple countries. In terms of what I do day to day, that starts to get a bit foggy. Again, from where I sit now, my dream is to be flying around the world, having incredible conversations, meeting people, speaking in events and in public and writing books and things like that. And above all, providing an incredible life to my family. That's probably the thing that resonates most throughout all of this. Obviously, there's an element of self actualization, becoming the person I know I can be, taking the brakes off, but financial and freedom and being able to care for my family is at the heart of all of this. At some point over the next, 25 years, I think it'd be cool to own a nice car. Yeah. Other than that, like a really, like a dream car type thing, but only when it's um, really sensible. Yeah, I think that one's a really tough one to answer in any great depth, at least depth that I'm comfortable to go into. So the next question is, what is masculinity to you? And this is such a fantastic question. For me, personally, masculinity is protecting, providing, and being better than your former self. The Ernest Hemingway quote, which is burned on the back of my mind. There is no, it's not that burned on the back of my mind, is it? But there's no true nobility in being superior to your former fellow man. The only true nobility is in being superior to your former self. I've butchered that, but you get the gist. Being better than everyone else, hollow victory. It's unachievable, and it's not worthwhile going. It's not something that you can ever actually, tick off. Whereas being superior to your former self, that's masculine. If you can be better than you were and show up for the people that you care about, you can protect, you can provide. That's what masculinity is to me. And however that manifests itself to you, protect, to provide, and to be better than your former self. Next question. What are the highs and lows of balancing life, parenting, and business? Is it what you thought? A very layered question, similar to the 1, 5, 10. The highs of parenting business are what keeps you going. With parenting, I think the whole thing is a kind of wonderful rose tint on life. You're seeing something that is someone that is a part of you and the person that you love the most, just becoming who they are. And I think at first it's really tough to conceptualize the fact that they are an individual that you've been part of. They're a part of you, but they are unto themselves. I love that. And them discovering the world. I think that's the best thing about having children, is getting to see, I guess, a part of yourself explore the world and experiencing it for the first time. Something we've just gone through is when they learn to blow raspberries, you go, and then 10 seconds later, because their little brain can't buffer, they go, and then it just feels incredible because, they hardly know what's going on. One thing I would say is a big high for me is how alert our child was, straight from the off, making eye contact, literally just after being born, and they have my eyes. So being able to see, a reflection of your own soul, because I think the eyes are really, really powerful. I agree that they're windows into the soul. And I think seeing that in like a tiny little thing that you've created. Yeah. Anyway, that was mostly about parenting. Business is fantastic. Like I love the idea of, business about learning to chew glass and, learning to love the taste of glass. But realistically, I have a really positive outlook with business in that I feel like I'm grateful for the challenges because it increases my tolerance for bullshit. And every hard thing that I go through increases that bar so that everything else that falls beneath it, is so. So yes, that's the lows. I appreciate the lows as much as I do the highs because that's, that's where I'm built. That's where I'm forged. That's where I'm tested. That's why I love endurance sport, ultra endurance, because you only really get to understand who you are once you've surpassed your limits. and you get to look at, you get to start scraping the bottom of the barrel of who you are for the essence of what remains when everything else is left. That's one of the reasons I'm excited to talk to Fergus Crawley. Is that's something that he's always been a champion of. After running his 250 double brutal, like crazy stuff. Next question: the best / thought-provoking conversations you've had for both business and personal. I'm just going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of ring fence this to one person. I've had so many incredible conversations. If you know me personally, or if you've gotten to know me personally through this podcast or my other content, there's nothing I love more than a deep, rich, engaged conversation where we're discussing things and throwing ideas off the wall. But a close friend of mine, a mentor and a friend, is Kieran O'Neill, the founder and CEO of Total Mental Performance. A conversation I had with him, or every conversation I have with him, is truly sensational. It is a chat, like it's a bookmark in the story of my life that I refer back to, that I think about. So, and we speak about everything from business to psychology to aliens to sport to all sorts, to cars, like all sorts. I really adore and appreciate his insight on my life. So that was, kind of melding the two together. Obviously, I could speak to, I cherish every conversation with Ailish, every conversation with my mum, my dad, and they're all deeply impactful. But I think, the heart of that question, Kieran O'Neill, is fantastic to speak to, and he'll be on the podcast soon. Next question: what is your most borderline unethical life hack? I feel irresponsible saying this, but honestly, business-wise, moving to Dubai, not paying tax. It's just, I'm not going to get political with this podcast ever, or I'll avoid it like the plague. But it really, the UK is something that deeply upsets me. The way in which an entity which I believe in, I still believe in, I'm incredibly patriotic. It's withering. However, from an individual standpoint, I don't think it's fair. And I think you need to look after you and be slightly selfish. So business-wise, the unethical life hack will be being able to save as much money as possible on tax. We can argue the morality and the ethics of that till the cows come home, but ultimately, if your vision is to have impact and help people, you're going to be able to do that more with more money. Yeah, I'll leave that as my unethical life hack. I can't think of any others. I'm a pretty straight shooter when it comes to life. Next question is Roman army or Greek army? Greek army for aura farming and Roman army for accolades and organization. If I have to choose one, it's the Roman army. You'll come to know that my Roman Empire is the Roman Empire. I did my thesis on it, and I absolutely adore ancient Greek and Roman antiquity, so much so that all of our baby names that we have picked out for the current baby, for future babies, are all Greek and Roman inspired. But the Roman army just nudges out because of its long-lasting impact on the future, on the history of warfare going forwards. But the Greek army is solely for the cool story and the vibes. Next question: what did it take to get to a high level in rugby and judo? Now, I have had the pleasure of competing in both sports beyond the level that most people would. I fought nationally. I have briefly played rugby at that kind of scale as well. I was not a professional. If you consider the army, I was a semi-professional, if that. To answer the question literally, what did it take? A great deal of time and obsession and, sporting-wise, dedication to just be better each week, each training. And something I used to do commonly is after I finished a game or a session, and this will be really valuable for you if you have a manager or a leader or a coach, feedback. I used to go to my coach at the end of a game, regardless of whether I'd had the fucking worst game of my life or whether I'd got man of the match, and say, what can I do better next time? Still covered in blood and mud and all sorts. And it seemed like a bit brown nosy, a bit, you know, keen, until it was understood that that was my personality. And that's the way that I've been pretty much my entire life. That's the way I was in Scouts, Army Cadets, all throughout my childhood. In uni, I used to go and ask for extra work and, get feedback on who I was, because if I'm honest with you, I don't really care what the impression of me is if I'm doing what I know to be the right thing and hard work. I think ridiculing people for doing too much work or like working too hard on themselves is ridiculous. The kind of person that would look at this podcast and go, oh, what is he doing? But I don't give a fuck. This makes me a better person and therefore helps me help other people be a better person. So if that doesn't resonate with them at the time, that's their problem. And I believe that they'll come around to it eventually. Everyone has the opportunity to round that corner where they go, you know what? I think I can be better. So that's what it took. Hours and hours and hours, years of my life. I used to train all but one day a week, one evening a week, for rugby, for judo. And it showed, when I started judo's slightly different because you haven't got so much opportunity to prove yourself. But I knew nothing. I'd obviously had a background in other martial arts and I started from zero. And I think the humility that comes with martial arts is incredibly valuable. But a great example in rugby is I was never fantastic at transitioning. It took me a little while to kind of get used to new environments. And as a junior, I went from a very small town club where I was the best player to a very large city club where they had like 4 or 5 teams. It was a Colchester rugby team. And this is a silly example because obviously I was a child. But when I first got there, because I'd been the best player at the previous club, I'd come to this new club expecting to be on like what's called the A team or the B team. And if you've played rugby as a kid or football, at a big club, you'll understand what I mean. And I was terrible. Comparatively, for some reason, my head went, and I got put in, I believe, the D team. From there, I then had to, over the course of trainings and Sundays, I had to work my arse off to get into the A team, because at the time I was like, I want to be in the best environment. I want to be sharpening steel with steel. I want to be up against the best people. And that just happened over time, constantly asking coaches, how can I be better? How can I show up better in the game? How can I, sharpen my own skills and actually genuinely put the work in to be better? And this happened all throughout everything that I did, whether that was Army Cadets, sport, the actual army itself, Welbeck, coming in the first year of Welbeck, level playing field, to leaving at the end of the second year being the equivalent of head boy and with the Sword of Honor, which, you get for a number of reasons. And it's this constant habit and desire to succeed and to be the best version of myself. And the habit therein lies, seek feedback, even if it's critical feedback, you have something to work with. I mean, with all of my videos, everything I do, I ask Ailish to be absolutely ruthless with me because she's better at a lot of things than me. I ask my friends, my coaches, watching this now, if there's something that sticks out, I want you to message me so I can have feedback. I want to be better. I'm never going to take it to heart if you think, wow, your voice is really fucking annoying. It might be that I can, do something about that, or at least the cadence or the mannerisms. So yes, anyway, that was a long answer to a very short question, and I'm going to speed through the last few. The next question is, what if I guilt myself for looking back on the periods of my life and feeling like I could have been performing better? It's a fantastic question. So part of me goes, everything that came before happened for a reason, and it led you to where you are now. That's what part of me says. The other part of me says, you know what? I think if the cost of inaction for you is only felt after the fact, perhaps you needed to feel that, and perhaps you should, you know, be frustrated with yourself at least enough to give you a little nudge to work harder going forwards. With that being said, you can't use that as your only fuel. You can't use inadequacy or anything negative to fuel you for a long period of time. It's dirty fuel. And that'll eventually, I say this to clients, and I have done for years. If you're putting a negative input in, you're going to get a negative input out. If you wanted to go on a fat loss journey because you hate how you look, you could argue it's good actually as a pain trigger to get you started. However, if you continue using that fuel source, you're going to hate how you look regardless of how lean or how jacked or how much progress you make, because you're still running on that deprivation, that lack of something. So I would say you need to come to terms with the fact that the past is the past and it led you to where you are now, but never ever forget the disappointment you felt in yourself for having not done your best at the time. That's what I would say. I just read this one ahead of time, but the next question, what does high performance mean to you? The money question. And question I get asked all the time. And for me, high performance broadly is, are you striving to be in the top 5, the top 1% of people of output in that given field? For me, high performance is about where your goalposts are and relating that back to who you are becoming and who you are at that time. High performance isn't, a definable line in the sand. I think it's the way in which you go about things. And obviously I've created the 5 Ps of high performance, and I can speak about these at great length, but, covering all the main aspects that you would need: your physical, your professional, your personal, your psychological, your purpose, your philosophy. And by the way, personal and psychological is like a slash. I know I said 6 things there, but your philosophical self, all of these need to be somewhat in some form of unison for you to be able to perform at your best. And I think it's the pursuit of that is high performance itself. Lewis Alsop said something a while ago that really, really stuck with me. And in life, there are winners and losers. And not in a literal sense of, obviously in a football game, there's winners and losers. More in a wider sense, there are people who want to win the day or win that interaction or continue to come out on top of themselves, of the situation. It's, are you willing to accept the results for the results, or are you wanting to work so that the results can fall in your favor so that you can create your own results? That's what that means to me. Are you a serial winner or a serial loser? And there's, it's not universal, by the way. Like, you can be a winner in one aspect and a loser in another. And I don't mean that in the scaling American colloquialism sense. I mean, there's going to be give and take. For me, in terms of my personal progression, in terms of my fitness, my health, how people view me that I'm interacting with, I need to be a winner. I need to be progressing. I need to be someone who is electric and magnetic. When it comes to political opinions and things like that, I'm not really that incentivized. I'm not really that interested in wanting to toe that line and kind of fight those battles. Probably a poor example, but that's what high performance boils down to, is whether you're forward facing and growth mindset, and where your goalposts are. Who are you looking at? Most people, when they look at doing a thing, a lot of people will look at the bare minimum. Like, what is the entry standard? What is the bare minimum height to ride the ride? Or, what is the lowest score that I can get to pass? That shatters my heart. What is the lowest score that I can get to pass? Whereas when I look at new things, when I look at new endeavors, I look at the very top, the creme de la creme, and I say, how can I put myself in a position where I don't like this wording, but my idols become my rivals. And I don't like that, because I don't think of them as rivals, where my inspiration meets emulation, for example, where my heroes become my peers, I think is a much, much better way of saying that. How can I put myself in that position? Looking at marathon timings or anything like that. How can you put yourself in a position to be achieving the top, top end of results? And listen, like, a great example is marathon timings. If you aim to be in the top 5% of your age group or all marathon times ever, but you are 100 kilos and 6'4", I'm not 6'4", but like, say 6'1" and 100 and whatever kilos I was at the time. Even if you fall short, being in the top third of all finishers ever is fantastic. Like with the Ironman, my ambition was to finish under 12 hours so that I'm, in the top percentage power to weight ratio wise. I didn't hit that. I fell short, but I did my best on the day. And the only thing that I can do going forward is learn lessons from that and, aspire for better results next time. So yeah, that's what high performance means to me. And that, I think, was really, really important to address. So thank you for asking that question, whoever that was. The next question is a short one. How many episodes are you planning to do? Many as I fucking can. Like, if I can, if I want to, until I die. I love this medium. As long as this medium still exists, in 20 odd years, I'd love to still be doing this. I think, obviously, only planning to do one episode a week, it's going to take me a very long time to hit 1,000 episodes. But yeah, to the moon. As many as you're willing to listen to, and as many conversations as I can find to have that are interesting. And this is the last question I've got on my list, at least. And I think I've answered this slightly, but what is happening with martial arts and judo? And I know who asked this, actually. So martial arts, specifically judo, is a love and a passion of mine. It's something that I deeply believe in for multiple reasons: for physical health, for discipline, for young people. I believe in martial arts. And I actually got back into it post shoulder surgery, post everything. Got back into it properly this year. And then obviously I've had my back injury where my back went. I now understand I've got these things to navigate. Now, one thing that was really, really important for me, going through any procedures, rehab, is that I can not compete. I'm never going to be able to compete again. Well, sorry, let me rephrase that. I'm not willing to compromise my quality of life to be able to compete at this moment in time. Because of my shoulder, because of my back, because of what I want to be able to be capable of doing with my family, I'm not going to compete professionally, semi-professionally, amateur. However, I do want to keep doing it in terms of technical skill development and for my own interest. So what's happening? I'm going through the rehab process for my back. I aim early next year to be getting back into judo, rolling, jiu-jitsu with a close friend of mine, James. He's someone I'm very excited to have on the podcast as well. Max as well, again, someone I'd love to speak to on the podcast. These are my friends, in my immediate circle who are incredible martial artists who I want to learn from. I've never really done much striking. I did karate, Shotokan, Kyokushinkai for a total of 7 years. But I feel like, a more kickboxing / MMA style would be interesting. And I suppose my ambition with judo, I did it for over 12 years. I competed, like I said, at high levels. I represented. But my biggest regret is over that space of time, I never took grading seriously. So I never graded to a black belt. And I think that part of it is because I wasn't the person I needed to be in order to actually undergo the skill development, to etc., to actually achieve that. But I'm old enough now, I'm learned enough now that I can definitely go and do a technical grading. I don't know if I've got anything to prove in terms of fighting for the belt. I do think I should do that, but I'll have to see how my health is. But it's certainly something that I feel like I paid my dues. It's something that I love. And, I went to Japan with the Army Judo team. And when we were at the Kodokan, the home of judo, historically, I bought myself a black belt because at the time I was competing and training so much that it was a matter of probably 6 months to a year before I went for my downgrade. And immediately preceding that trip, 3 months later, I irreparably destroyed my shoulder, and that put a 5-year hiatus on me doing judo that I've only returned to this year. So I'm a little bit rusty. My black belt is, I've always said to myself, actually, before I earn the opportunity to speak to Joe Rogan, I need to have my black belt so I can, show up as myself in that room. So that's something I'll be working towards. Jiu-jitsu, wrestling, I love combat sports anyway. So I'm going to leave the questions there. I mean, that's the end of the questions anyway, at least the ones I could talk about. And my sincere hope with this is that you've enjoyed my thoughts out loud, my ramblings, my stories. And I cannot wait. I genuinely feel so privileged being able to bring you this. And for anyone who has made it this far in the podcast, message me, because I'd love to thank you personally. Whether it's in a month's time after it's released or in 10 years' time, coming back and watching it, I just want you to know that I'm thinking of you while I'm making this. And as I'm making things going forward, I want to be able to serve you. I mean, there's a saying, the motto of Sandust is serve to lead. And I really take that on board with myself. I want to have the courage to be able to ask questions that are important. I want to respect my guests and myself and, really go about this with a lot of integrity. So without further ado, thank you very much for listening. I wholly enjoyed this, and I look forward to many, many more hours with you, whether it's in the car, whether it's on YouTube. Thank you so much.